I love this glass. Hello, number ones. Welcome to Metatron's Academy. So, what's the best way to learn a language, you ask? Well, we've got a, what the heck is that, a bear? We've got a beaver? A beaver? A bear. I'm going to go for a bear. We've got a bear that can teach us that. How about we check it out?
So you probably encountered some YouTube gurus claiming that you can learn a language in a month if you just followed their advice and bought some language learning lessons that they have created. Well, first of all, you can't really learn a whole new language in a month.
I already like him. Also, they're not called gurus, they're called frauds.
Even the most diligent of learners will not be able to attain fluency in such a short amount of time. Often than not, these YouTubers are just clickbaiting and attempting to sell you something, which is why I wanted to talk about these quote-unquote best methods of language learning.
Let's go.
As a person who has gotten a degree in linguistics, I was a bit tired of seeing all these scams popping up in my recommendation feed, so I decided to make this video. You see, I'll be going over all the most important second language acquisition theories that have been proposed by esteemed linguists. The linguists that I'll be mentioning in this video have dedicated their whole lives to researching how second language acquisition works, and how to
I would like to underline, I always love listening to linguists, but not all linguists actually know how to learn a language. Linguists are excellent at the mechanics of a language, and the articulation, the explanation of the organs involved, the way certain sounds are produced. They're fantastic, all about their fricative and interdental and all that kind of stuff. It's great, but I have met linguists that do not speak any other language, or if they do, it's very basic. With that being said,
best maximize learning another language. Along with this, I will also include various research studies that support these kinds of theories. After that, I'll give my own opinion of what I believe is the best way of learning another language based on these theories. Okay, so let's get started.
Yeah.
So, when you think about the main components of learning a second language, you think of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Linguists typically don't deal with written language, as that's a whole separate thing from actual spoken language, so let's focus on speaking and listening for now. One of the main things that differentiates the theories is how much importance is placed on speaking and listening. In other words, modern-day linguists are attempting to figure out whether language input or output is more important for learning a language. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's talk about the first main theory, which is the output theory.
Yes, so before he jumps into the theory, in my experience as a teacher, it is case by case, and it depends on the student. Because ideally, you would want speaking ability, listening, reading, and writing, because the other two are also important part of the equation, to all be at a possibly relatively similar level. It's almost impossible to have them perfectly exactly the same, and there will always be some natural propensity which is part of this equation. So there will be some people that are really good at understanding, but when it comes to expressing themselves, they struggle. You have people that are the exact opposite. They speak very quickly, and they will be able to kind of put out their thoughts and express their feelings easily, but they do not understand when natives speak back. There are people that suck at writing, even if they're freaking native speakers. They really still don't know how to freaking spell, depending on the language, with Asian languages being the most complicated aspect of that. And then there are, of course, people that might excel at reading and writing, maybe even translating, but they don't speak well, and so on and so forth. So as a language teacher, my job is to realize what you're good at, which of these you excel at naturally, and then exploit that skill so that you can reach your maximum potential on what you excel at, while at the same time trying to increase and level up the levels of those areas where that you struggle with, in order to try and create a compensation. But very much will depend on the goal of the student, because what's the point if the student just wants to speak? What's the point? You don't even need to learn the freaking kanji if you don't want to, if that's not your goal. But if you want to pass the Nihongo no Ryokushiken, or Japanese proficiency language test, because you need it, then of course you'll have to spend a lot of time into kanji acquisition. It really depends on what you want to do. Do you want to learn it because you like the idea of learning the culture and you want to be able to travel and speak? Or do you want to learn it because you're trying to write a novel in that language? It really depends. It is case by case.
The most notable advocates for the output theory is a Canadian applied linguist by the name of Meryl Swain. According to Meryl Swain, output is one of the most important factors when it comes to progressing in one's language learning. The main reason for this is because of something called the monitor. And no, not the monitor that is connected to your computer.
No.
A monitor in this context is a person's ability to filter out any incorrect language from being uttered. But why is this monitor so integral to the output theory? Well, according to Swain, the monitor allows a learner to notice any gaps in their knowledge of a second language. For example, I may want to tell a Spanish native speaker, if only only I had gotten a better grade. But before saying the phrase in Spanish, your internal monitor may catch that you're going to utter a sentence that is grammatically incorrect. Therefore, you may stop yourself from saying the sentence. The benefit of this is that your conscious brain has now been made aware that you lack the ability to convey regrets about past actions in the target language. If I had never done any output of the second language, I would have never noticed this gap in my knowledge. But now that I'm aware of it, I'm able to actively research the correct ways of saying my thoughts in the target language. This isn't just limited to grammar, but it can be as easy as learning new words in the language.
And even pronunciation. You might think you know, in fact, you still need to, rather than stopping yourself, you still try. Because making a mistake, if you say, I don't know, if you see for the first time the word tough and you have no idea, how is it pronounced? Toof, toff, tog. I mean, some people do pronounce it tough, depending on the accent. But imagine, right, that your target accent says it as tough, but you say it wrong, and then they will correct you that it's actually tough. Then you learn it. I remember I mispronounced tastes, the third singular of taste. I said tastes for so freaking long until a saint, a great soul, a holy martyr for the cause actually told me it's tastes, not tastes. Boom. Never forgot it ever since.
While outputting your target language, you may notice that you don't know a word for a certain thing, so you might ask a native speaker or look it up in the dictionary. By doing this, you have increased your language ability. Now, you might be saying, can't we notice these gaps in knowledge simply through input only? In other words, can't I just listen to a bunch of media or native speakers and realize what things I don't know that way? Well, you can, but according to a 2002 study, the students who were made to output more language were able to learn new grammar much quicker than the students who were only given language input.
I can see that, and I can agree with that. Absolutely. Good point.
The study suggests that output allows the students to learn grammar quicker. Of course, this is only a study of 60 students, so take this with a grain of salt. Additionally, this was testing grammar and not other aspects of language like vocabulary. But why does output seem to be so important for grammar? Well, the main explanation is that when you're solely receiving language input, you're mostly focused on understanding the meaning of speech, which means that you aren't really paying much attention to the structure of language or the grammar. Meanwhile, when you are forced to do language output, your brain has to convert your own thoughts into meaningful sentences that are grammatically correct.
I would like to say that both play a role. I'm happy to accept, if further studies done, that perhaps the output does give you the highest benefit. With that being said, as someone who lived in both Japan and England when I was trying to pick up Japanese and English, I do remember that input, when it's in, rather than being just you watching something, but you're actually involved in something that becomes a memory, then I have learned things and entire structures, in fact, simply because someone said them. But it was a meaningful situation. And so I learned it, and then I just repeated it. And this can happen with a movie as well. For instance, I learned the expression, let me give you a piece of advice, in English, from the movie The Matrix, when Trinity tells Neo, as he's about to meet Morpheus, she says, let me give you a piece of advice. I would have never said it that way, because in Italian it wouldn't be a piece of advice. It would just be an advice. Of course, you don't have to say it that way, but imagine now multiply that over a certain amount of years, the amount of structures, sentences, vocabulary, and expressions that you can pick up just by simply listening to them and then storing them in memory and picking them up when you yourself and in a situation where a scenario where that would make sense logically, and then you repeat it and it's perfect because you learned it from a native, you know, it's not to be underestimated.
Because of this, it appears that if you want to improve your grammar in a language, the most efficient way is probably to speak the language with a native speaker. This, of course, can be quite hard because many people live in areas where it's very hard to find native speakers in their target language. And that's why I want to introduce to you today's sponsor for the video, italki. Now, italki
is a good sponsor. I like it. I hope they sponsor me one of these days, but whether they do or not, I will say pretty good sponsor. Okay, so input theory, acquisition learning. Let's have a look at the input theory. Don't watch the entire video, by the way. It's my way to do reacts. I try to make them highly transformative in nature, and at the same time I always leave entire segments so that it acts as a demo for you watching it, so that you have a reason to go and actually watch the video from the original channel. Give them the like, give them the view. Anyways, let's have a look at what they say with the input theory, and grab that money, mate.
And for a limited time, italki is hosting a language challenge from now until October. During this challenge, you can earn rewards by progressing in your language goals. If you want to participate in the challenge and earn prizes, click the link in the description below. Thank you, italki, so much for sponsoring this video, and let's go into the next theory. The next theory that you probably have heard about is the input theory. Now, this one is often spouted to be the best method of learning a new language by many YouTubers online. Some even claim to throw traditional learning out the window and solely rely on input. So, let's see what all the fuss is about and learn about input theory. It all started with a man named Stephen Krashen, who is the most famous proponent of the input theory. According to Stephen Stephen Krashen, there are 5 key principles that are important to know about the input theory, which include acquisition learning, comprehensible input, monitor hypothesis, natural order, and effective filter.
You'll have to be careful with one thing though. It probably isn't the case when it comes to this famous and established linguist that is being quoted here, but do keep this in mind. A lot of those frauds that he was mentioning will use extremely complicated high-level vocabulary to sell their nonsense. Or sometimes it's not even nonsense, but it's just simple. Like you will hear someone call just watch TV, but they will call it as an effective hypothesis of comprehensive learning sub-filter of memorization synapses pattern. They'll say that. And then you're like, what is it? And then they'll explain it, and it's just freaking watch TV and take notes. So this is used by frauds. So just because you see these big words and it sounds all so professional, it does not mean that, oh, but this guy probably knows what he's talking about. Again, I'm not talking about the bear. The bear is cool. Is it a bear or is it an otter? Maybe it's okay, let's drop it. It's not a bear. That's not the tail of a bear. It's an otter.
Let's start with the first one, which is acquisition learning, which is probably the most important thing to know about input theory. According to Krashen, there's a clear distinction between learning and acquisition. Think back on those times you were in a foreign language class and were told to memorize an entire conjugation table. This memorization of rules is what Krashen calls learning language. Acquiring language, on the other hand, is a subconscious process. A learner will often not realize that they have acquired new language. Compare this with learning, which is more of an active and conscious action.
I agree with this distinction. Very good.
According to Krashen, acquiring language is a more efficient way of becoming fluent when compared to learning language, since acquiring builds your ability to generate language spontaneously. Meanwhile, relying on your learned language will require you to slowly construct your sentences through recalling all the rules you learned in class, which takes much longer and is not really how we naturally speak. But how do you acquire language and not learn it? Well, this leads us into the second of the 5 important points, comprehensible input. According to Krashen, the most ideal form of input you can have as a language learner is input that is slightly above your current level. Ideally, you want to control your input by having it be I plus 1, where I is your current language knowledge and plus 1 is the increase in the level. But what would this actually look like in practice? Well, imagine you're learning the English language and you encounter a sentence like, we saw a lot of people dobbling into the subway. You probably understand this entire sentence except for the made-up word dobbling. This is a perfect example of I plus 1, or in other words, comprehensible input. Now, you probably don't even need a dictionary to understand this new word dobbling, since you can use the context to fill in the blanks. You'll probably assume that dobbling has something to do with hopping onto a vehicle. And just like that, you have learned a new word in the language. This is why Stephen Krashen...
Very good example. See, an otter is better than the frauds. That was actually very good. All right, so I'll skip monitor hypothesis, affective filter, input in the classroom, and criticism. Let's have a look at the interaction theory,
since it combines both input and output, and that is interaction theory. The biggest proponent of this method was a psycholinguist by the name of Michael Long. According to him, the best way of learning a language is through face-to-face communication. If a native speaker is unable to communicate their ideas to you, they will naturally lower the complexity of their speech until it is comprehensible to a language learner. By doing this, the learner will now be getting constant comprehensible input tailored specifically for them, as long as they continue to communicate with that native speaker. On top of this, the learner will be able to output as well. As the output theory suggests, the learner may realize that they're unable to communicate their idea effectively, so they'll ask the native speaker for an explanation, either on a definition or how to word something correctly. Overall, interaction theory is suggesting that to get the best comprehensible input and output, you need to be constantly interacting with native speakers who are willing to work with you. According to Long, the most ideal scenario for the interaction theory is if both the native speaker and the learner are placed in a situation in which communication is needed to achieve similar goals. For example, let's say you go to a rural farm in Mongolia and work with a family there. In order
let's go to a rural farm in Mongolia, because that's what the average viewer was gonna do.
To achieve the goals of their farm, the family will have to communicate with the learner in their language. To do this, they will simplify their language and maybe use a lot of hand gestures to bridge the gap. Likewise, the learner will be forced to speak Mongolian, even if at a basic level, as to facilitate cooperation. In this ideal scenario, interaction theory suggests that the learner will learn the language at the most rapid and efficient rate. So, in a classroom setting, a teacher who is really into the interaction method might encourage a back and forth between the more advanced speakers and the beginner speakers in the class. Once again though, there are a few arguments against this approach. Some researchers claim that interaction is not needed to learn a language. This can be
I disagree.
Seen in cultures that do not speak to their baby until the child has reached a certain point in their language development, such as the Kululi people in Papua New Guinea. If a baby is able to learn a language without any back and forth communication between them and the parent, then it appears that interaction is not really essential to language learning.
You shouldn't use, no. No, that's a false equivalence because it has to do with natives. Natives are still surrounded and immersed in their native language. However, what we are discussing now is second language acquisition or foreign language acquisition, which is always a harder process. Anyways, let's see the conclusion.
To communicate with an individual who doesn't even speak their language. All right, so now that you've heard some of the main theories of second language acquisition, which one is the
Good
best?
video.
Well, once again, these are all theories, so it might be best that you implement each one to the best of your ability and slowly adjust things depending on what best suits your learning style.
Exactly. So you see, me and the animal with a fish on his head, at the end of the day, agree, because I did say at the beginning, as a language teacher, it really needs to be suited. There is no single perfect answer. It depends on the individual needs of the individual student. So at the end of the day, we do agree. Thank you very much. It was cool. I liked the video. Very nice. Here's the like and appreciated it. I hope you guys liked it. Check him out. Subscribe. All the good stuff. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.